10th, 25th Ohio Pawpaw Festival. Anybody been here for all 25? Hasn't been one hand that's gone up all day long. Okay. My name's Rob Brannon. I'm a food scientist, pawpaw scientist. I work at Ohio University, which is about 8 miles that way. Ohio University. It says here. It says there. It says there too. So just in case you need documentation. So this is our last presentation of the day. Valerie Libbey is going to talk about pretty much everything to do with pawpaws. So right there is the North American Pawpaw Growers Association. If you've been in this tent earlier today, you might have heard me say this. There is more concentrated information about pawpaw in that tent right now than anywhere else on planet Earth today, September 16, 2023. All right, so if you have any questions, there's no presentation after this, so you're going to talk like for 2 hours? Yeah, she'll be here for 2 hours. So she'll take all your questions, but if you have any questions now, tomorrow, right, go over to the Growers Association and they'll help you out. Okay, without further ado, Val, you ready to go?
Yeah.
Take it away.
Hey, good afternoon. Thanks so much for joining me here today. My name is Valerie Libbey, and I'm going to be presenting the Essential Guide to Pawpaws, History, Resources, and Pro Tips. I live in Columbus, Ohio, but I grow pawpaws on my family farm in Fayette County, and we're just 1 year away from being a century farm. Yeah, and I am also with the North American Pawpaw Growers Association. So we're a nonprofit organization that was established in 2000, and we're committed to raising awareness of pawpaws, educating consumers, and supporting backyard growers and professional growers. And so for today's agenda, I'm going to be covering just some basic background information, talking about food safety and tree identification, covering some information on history and cultivars, providing you with resources and growing information, and saving a lot of time for Q&A at the end if you have any specific questions. And so way down yonder in the Pawpaw Patch is a traditional folk song, but it really hit the mainstream in the US in 1963 when Burl Ives released this album. And it's funny that I've met so many people who know the song but still have no idea what a pawpaw is. But pawpaws are very special to the state of Ohio. It is our official state native fruit. It was adopted in January 2009 when Senate Bill 243 was passed and signed by Governor Ted Strickland. And so the original native growing range for pawpaws stretches from northern Florida to the southern edge of Canada, and you can successfully grow them in USDA growing zones 5 through 8, but there are a lot of growers who are stretching those boundaries now. But the key to really successful growing is that you need a hot, humid summer and a dormancy period of at least 400 chilling hours. And so that's why you're not going to find pawpaws, at least Asimina triloba, on the southern ends of Texas and Florida. And so during peak season, there's a lot of fake news about pawpaws, and so I just want to provide a quick PSA on basic food safety. So when you're handling pawpaws, just make sure you're following the FDA basic safe food guidelines for all fresh produce. I would recommend that you don't eat the skin, not because it's harmful, but because it is bitter and has a pretty unpleasant taste. But you do want to be careful not to consume any leaves or barks. And that's because pawpaws have a natural pesticide in the tree called acetogenins, and which is kind of harmful to humans. And so what you don't want to do is create any homemade teas, tinctures, or other extracts. You also don't want to eat any unripe fruit. And you can tell that a fruit is ripe when you give it a gentle squeeze and it has that same give as a ripe avocado or a ripe peach. You also want to be careful not to eat any seed materials. So similar to like you don't want to eat any apple seeds or cherry pits because there are some toxic substances in there. So when you're processing pawpaw pulp, make sure that you're really careful when you're using a blender or food processor. But most importantly, do not dehydrate pawpaws. in terms of making like fruit leathers or fruit roll-ups. And so Native Americans were able to preserve and dry pawpaws, but that technique has been completely lost to history. But what we do know is that if you put a pawpaw in a modern dehydrator, the result is going to be very quick, and you're going to have basically the same symptoms as food poisoning. And in rare cases, some people have had to go to the emergency room. And lastly, don't eat any fruit that's been punctured or damaged by critters. And I know that it may be tempting to salvage some of that fruit, but I can promise you that the raccoons and possums are not using hand sanitizer on their dirty little nails.
Oh, really?
And so this really often doesn't get acknowledged, but pawpaws actually make really great native landscaping trees. They've been recognized by the Ohio Nursery and Landscaping Association and were named Tree of the Year several years back. And please don't believe the rumors. The pawpaw blossoms do not give off a really bad, offensive smell. In my experience, you really have to stick your nose right into the flower, and all I pick up is a very faint, yeasty smell. So don't let that deter you from planting pawpaws in your backyard. Pawpaws often get misidentified out in the woods, but you can find them by looking for these large tropical leaves that are 6 to 12 inches long, and they sit in an alternating pattern on the branches. And my tip for you today is to download the iNaturalist app. It's a free app, and it was created in collaboration with the National Geographic Society and the California Academy of Sciences. And basically what they're doing is crowdsourcing information from users. And so if you're on the lookout for pawpaw trees or pawpaw patches, the answer is probably right there on your phone. And then the other easy way to find pawpaws is in the fall, because their leaves turn this brilliant yellow color and they're very easy to spot. So mark your calendars, because next Thursday is autumn equinox, and at least in central Ohio, you'll see the leaves start turning kind of in mid to late October. So that's a great time to start looking for them. So the zebra swallowtail butterfly is technically a pest, but we consider them a friend. And the pawpaw is the exclusive host plant to the larva. So the zebra swallowtail butterflies are native to the eastern U.S. and southeastern Canada, and you can find them anywhere from late March to August in the northern part of their range. And here's a photo example of a zebra swallowtail butterfly egg. And there are folks who will grow pawpaws not for landscaping, not even for the fruit, but specifically to save this endangered butterfly. And here you can see the caterpillar. And like I mentioned earlier, pawpaw leaves have the acetogenins, but the caterpillars can safely consume the leaves, and it absorbs the acetogenins, and it actually becomes like a natural protection against predators like birds. And so my recommendation for you, though, is that if you have a really young sapling and you find a caterpillar on it, they could do some damage to the tree. So you probably want to just gently rehome it to a larger tree that has young, green, tender leaves. And so pawpaw flowers are not pollinated by bees, but by flies, beetles, and other insects. And they're considered a perfect flower in that they have both the female and male reproductive structures. And so in this photo, this is an example of the female stage of the blossom, and you can tell by the center with the really bright, shiny green stigma. And as the blossom develops, you can see that the petals turn a really dark maroon color, and then the anthers start turning brown and start shedding pollen. And so to get a successful fruit set, you need cross-pollination from two genetically different pawpaw varieties. And I've had a lot of luck with hand pollination. And all you need to do is get a very fine, flexible, soft brush, collect some pollen on the end of the brush, and just gently apply it to the green stigma of a receptive female blossom. And with any luck, you'll end up with a fruit cluster that looks something like this, depending on what area you live in, from April, May, June timeframe. So pawpaws have a very long and interesting history that goes back to Native American times and goes back to, Native Americans and early colonial times. And the first written documentation of pawpaws was in 1541 by an officer who was on the expedition with Spanish explorer Hernando de Soto, and he recorded observations of Native Americans growing and eating pawpaws in the Mississippi Valley. And so if we jump forward in time a little bit, John Bartram was a Quaker farmer in Philadelphia. He didn't have an advanced education, but at the time he was considered world's greatest natural botanist. So for 38 years, he carried on a transatlantic botanical exchange with an English merchant named Peter Collinson. And we actually have Bartram to thank for all of the beautiful gardens that you see in Europe and Asia. And part of that botanical exchange included pawpaws. And according to legend, George Washington's favorite dessert was a chilled pawpaw. So we know that Washington kept very meticulous records of his plantings, and we have his diary entries when he had his pawpaw plantings. And so if you visit Mount Vernon, which is in Fairfax County, Virginia, just 13 miles south of Washington, D.C., or if you visit Mount Vernon's website, if you look at the garden maps, there are still extensive pawpaw plantings across all of the property. And Thomas Jefferson was only 26 years old when he started construction on Monticello, and he also kept really detailed records of his plantings. And if you visit Monticello today, there is a very large pawpaw tree that stands directly behind the house. And he also wrote about pawpaws in his book Notes on the State of Virginia that was published in 1782. And we know that when he was minister to France, he shipped pawpaw seeds to his friends overseas. And pawpaws were the fruit that saved Lewis and Clark. So when the Corps of Discovery, which consisted of over 30 men, were returning from their western expedition, they were only about 100 miles away from returning home to St. Louis, and they completely ran out of provisions. And Meriwether Lewis was actually badly wounded from a hunting accident. But we have William Clark's journal entry on September 18, 1806, where he talks about the men foraging for pawpaws, and they were thrilled with what they found and ate a lot of them. But there's also a dark side to pawpaw history. And so the Hatfield and McCoy feud actually peaked in what's called the Pawpaw Tree Incident. And this started with an election day event in 1882, August of 1882, where Ellison Hatfield got into a heated argument with 3 of the McCoy brothers. And what happened, Ellison was actually stabbed 27 times and shot in the back. And so the Hatfields rounded up the McCoy boys. And what's shocking to me is that Ellison actually survived for about another 48 hours. But when he finally succumbed to his wounds, the Hatfields took the McCoys into the woods, tied them to pawpaw trees, and shot them dead in retaliation. And so the state of Kentucky actually has a historical marker at the site of the execution that you can still visit today. And if you visit the location, there's actually a very large, healthy, active pawpaw patch that's still there. So one of my favorite topics is actually pawpaws in botanical art. So we're going to go back in time a little bit with Philip Miller. He was the head gardener of the Chelsea Physic Garden in London, and he actually revolutionized gardening with the release of his book, The Gardener's Dictionary, and it made plant information accessible to the average citizen. And so if you remember when I was talking about John Bartram and Peter Collinson, this is where the story comes full circle, because Philip Miller was the first Englishman to successfully grow a pawpaw plant from seed outside of the U.S. This is John James Audubon's plate 275, the yellow-billed cuckoo, from his work, Birds of America. The bad news is that Audubon did not like pawpaws. And we know this because we have his diary entries where he writes about the fruit and calls it pulpy and insipid. And so somebody gave Audubon a bad pawpaw. And so the lesson here is that when you're introducing people to pawpaws, please make sure you're giving them a good piece of fruit. And if you've never had a chance to visit the Dayton Art Institute, I can't recommend it enough. It's like a hidden gem in our state. And if you go to the Americas collection, you can see this oil painting, Still Life with Pawpaws. It was painted circa 1870 to 1875 by Edward Edmondson Jr. And so Edmondson was born in Dayton, Ohio. He was the son of a tanner, and he didn't carry on the family business, but decided to pursue art. And the Dayton Art Institute owns nearly 30 of his pieces. And to see this painting in front of you in person is amazing. So if you have a chance to visit, please do. Now I'm going to talk a little bit about cultivars. And so cultivars are plant varieties that have been produced by selective breeding. And some of the superior qualities that we look for in pawpaws include large size, low seed ratio, taste, and disease resistance. And so the most famous pawpaw breeder is Neil Peterson. He tasted his first pawpaw in 1975 when he was working on his master's degree at West Virginia University. And so he has a list of trademarked cultivars that you can find listed. It's available in the nursery trade, and you can find those nurseries listed on his website. And the names are all callbacks to the Native American roots of pawpaws. And those include Shenandoah, from which I understand is one of his personal favorites, Susquehanna, Rappahannock, Allegheny, Potomac, which is a larger fruit, Wabash, which I believe was one of the contest winners today, and Tallahatchie. And Kentucky State University, it has the only dedicated full-time pawpaw research department in the world. They're also home to the USDA National Clonal Germplasm Repository that was established in 1994, and they have pawpaw orchards that sit on about 12 acres of their ag campus. And they also have 3 trademarked varieties, including KSU Atwood, which is one of my favorites, KSU Benson, and KSU Chappelle. And you can find licensed nurseries on their website for these varieties. So Jerry Lehman was from Terre Haute, Indiana. He passed away in 2019, but he was a very well-known and very well-respected pawpaw and persimmon breeder. And I'm actually hard-pressed to think of an Ohio Pawpaw Festival where one of his varieties didn't win for best taste or especially largest pawpaw. And so here are some of the more well-known ones. And you can find his varieties with Cliff England. Cliff owns England Nursery and Orchards in McKee, Kentucky, and he is over in the other tent if you need to ask him any questions or want to learn more about Jerry Lehman. And then there's also what I call heritage cultivars, and these are cultivars that kind of have stood the test of time, and they are also widely available in the nursery trade. And some of the names that you may hear pretty often include Overleaf, NC1, Sunflower, Mango, and Pennsylvania Golden. And when I talk about resources, I'll be circling back on this topic. And so hopefully you still have a beer in your hand, but The craft brewers and distillers have done a lot of great experimenting with Pawpaws, and that seems to be one of the larger end uses for Pawpaw pulp in the industry today. But they've experimented with beer, wine, moonshine, mead, and cider. And if you haven't had a chance to visit the beer tent on the other side of the grounds, make sure you grab a beer before you leave today. But in terms of food, especially during peak season, a lot of people are looking for good recipe ideas. And Kentucky State University has a dedicated recipe page that you can find online. And they're pretty well known for their Pawpaw ice cream recipe and Pawpaw jam. And if you visit my website, I also have some recipes that are available. And if you visit the tent next door, you can grab a copy of the recipe card for my Pawpaw ice cream. I've also done Pawpaw Pop-Tarts, sugar cookies, and Pawpaw Posset, which is a traditional English dessert. Sarah Burr is a writer and chef based out of Marietta, Ohio. Unfortunately, she wasn't able to make it to the festival this year, but she is a fantastic person and very knowledgeable about foraging. And she published the Pocket Pawpaw Cookbook in 2021. And this is probably my go-to cookbook for Pawpaw recipes. And you can order it online. And she has a lot of the standard recipes that you would expect to find for Pawpaws, but she also has some exotic options, and one of her favorites is banana Pawpaw ketchup. So check that out. So here we are at the Ohio Pawpaw Festival, which is the Super Bowl of all Pawpaw events, but there are actually still a lot of events that are still on the calendar in the next 2 weeks. So if you're interested in a road trip or looking for fresh fruit or some more trees, I got some options for you. And so at the Cincinnati Nature Center, they're going to be hosting Pawpaw hunting at Long Branch Farms and Trails on September 17th and 22nd. It's going to be hosted by Jason Newman, who is a very knowledgeable Pawpaw person. You do need to register online to RSVP and pay for a small ticket purchase. But this event is very family friendly. And then next Tuesday, I will be at the Farm Science Review with Ohio State University. This is the first time that they're going to be hosting Pawpaw Day at Gwynn Conservation Center. And so we're going to have several talks, a hike, and I'll be doing a demonstration on Pawpaw pulp processing and handing out samples of my Pawpaw ice cream. You do need to order tickets online, but it's going to be in London, Ohio, September 19th, and I hope to see you there. Next Thursday is Kentucky State University's third Thursday thing, and they're going to be hosting National Pawpaw Day. If you're not able to make it to Frankfort, Kentucky, they will be live streaming the event, and also you'll be able to catch a replay of an archived version of the video on YouTube. Also, York County Pawpaw Festival will be September 23rd and 24th. At the Horn Farm Center for Agricultural Education in York, Pennsylvania. I haven't had a chance to go to this event, but I've heard really great things, and from what I understand, they should have fresh fruit available and some really great trees. And then on September 30th, West Virginia University is going to be hosting their Pawpaw Festival at the Core Arboretum, which is right next to the football stadium. And like I mentioned before, this is Neil Peterson's alma mater, and so he is going to be giving a presentation, and if you're interested in meeting Neil, this would be your chance. And so for today's presentation, my goal is to make sure that you can walk away and feel like you're armed with everything that you need to know to be able to go out and research questions that you have about Pawpaws, or know who to go to if you need some help or support with troubleshooting. And so there are several books that are available that you can order online or pick up at bookstores. And the first one that I would recommend is Pawpaw: In Search of America's Forgotten Fruit by Andrew Moore. He's a Pittsburgh-based writer, and he published this book in 2017, and it was recognized by the James Beard Foundation. He is an outstanding writer, and the book is more about the history of pawpaws, and it's more like a travel log. But what's really interesting to me is that each of the chapters kind of profile some of the living legends within the pawpaw community, and you're lucky that most of those guys are sitting in the tent right next door. So if you have a chance to visit and meet some of these guys, please do. And then in 2019, Michael Judd published For the Love of Pawpaws. He specializes in permaculture, and he is the owner of Long Creek Homestead in Frederick, Maryland. And he actually just had his own Pawpaw Festival last weekend. This book contains a lot of color illustrations and color photography that make for really good references. And then in 2021, Blake Cothran published Pawpaws, The Complete Growing and Marketing Guide. He's the owner and operator of Peaceful Heritage Nursery in Stamford, Kentucky, and he really specializes in organic growing practices. And what really jumps out to me, it's overall a very solid book. He has a chapter about cultivars, and it's the most comprehensive list of cultivars that I've ever seen in print. It covers the history, some of the flavor profiles, and seasonality of the different cultivars. And for me, the price of the book is worth that chapter alone. So it makes a really good reference book. And like I've been mentioning throughout the presentation, Kentucky State University is just a wealth of knowledge. They have a dedicated page. All you have to do is Google KSU Pawpaw, and it'll come right up in your search results. And they also have a YouTube channel that has a lot of short videos with really good tips on growing and processing the fruit. And then we have, Professor Rob Brannon from Ohio University. He's one of our festival organizers, and also a guru on pawpaw processing and nutrition. And you can find his PowerPoint presentations online and some of his archived presentations on YouTube. The Ohio State University actually has two pawpaw orchards. One is in Columbus, Ohio, off of Kenny Road, just off of campus. And the other is in Piketon, Ohio, which is about 20 miles south of Chillicothe at the OSU South Centers. And if you visit the South Center's website, they have a dedicated pawpaw page with an archive of all of the material from the Ohio Pawpaw Growers Association. So this is a really good resource if you want to really dig deep into pawpaw information. And so there's been an explosion of pawpaw Facebook groups over the last couple of years. I think my last count there were at least 16, but there are three that I do want to highlight to you. The first is Pawpaw Fanatics, and that was created by Neil Peterson. He's one of the administrators, and you can frequently see him commenting or answering questions, and it has over 10,000 members. The next is Pawpaw Chronicles, which was created just a few years ago by Jim Dingus, sitting right up here in the front row. And he has a lot of fantastic videos that's very helpful for growers, and so please check that one out. And then also Pawpaw Fan Club. There are over 14,000 members, and this caters to more of an international crowd. But those are the three that I would strongly recommend joining if you'd like to learn more. So now I'm going to touch on pawpaw growing, and you could really go into a deep rabbit hole on different topics. So I'm just going to cover the basics and leave plenty of time at the end for Q&A, and I have a lot of experts here sitting in the front row with me that can help support answering questions as well. But pawpaw seeds are a dark brown and about the size of a lima bean. And so why would you want to grow pawpaws from seed? I think there are three good reasons. The first is to introduce genetic diversity through cross-pollination. The second is to grow your own rootstock that's hardy and acclimated to the region that you're in. And the third is to just create easy native edible landscape in or around woodland areas that you have. My word of caution for you is that there are some people out there selling pawpaw seeds at very, very premium prices, and claiming that you're going to get a certain cultivar. But please know that Pawpaw seeds are not true to parent, and so that's actually false advertising. So please be aware of that if you're purchasing seeds. And so after you're done eating a pawpaw, you can save the seeds. There are only 2 rules that you need to remember. Don't keep them in your freezer and don't let them dry out. They do need to go through a cold stratification process, and all you need to do is clean them, put them into a Ziploc baggie in a moist but not wet medium like sphagnum peat moss. And then you just need to keep them in the fridge for a period of at least 90 to 120 days. And then you can start germinating them. But it will take at least 2 months for a taproot to emerge. And so I like to pre-germinate my pawpaw seeds, and I prefer to lay them flat, and you want to plant them about 1 to 2 inches in a tree pot container or in the ground. I recommend using a high quality potting mix with good drainage, and for pawpaws the optimal pH is 5.5 to 7, and this is what we call a pink knuckle. And so it takes a lot of patience for the leaves to finally emerge. And so, because in the first couple of years, that plant is going to put most of its energy into growing its taproot and other roots in the system. And the secret ingredient that I'll share with you is a mycorrhizal inoculant, which is just good fungi. And you can find those at your local greenhouse or garden center. And what that does is it really helps with nutrient absorption. And so here you can see some young saplings, and they're planted in tall tree pots. And again, going back to the topic of long tap roots, you can see that they're sitting on kind of these graded crates down at the bottom, and that's to facilitate air pruning, because as the taproot emerges, once it's exposed to air, it will kind of burn off, so to speak, and force the plant to put more energy into growing lateral branch roots. And that creates more stability for the plant long term. And so as the plant matures, at this stage you could potentially graft on these plants as long as they're about the width of a number 2 pencil. And if you're transplanting them into the ground, expect to have a little bit of transplant shock, and so you really need to baby the plants for the first couple of years. My recommendation is that you absolutely put some kind of cage protection around the plant to protect against rabbits, groundhogs, and people with weed whackers. And so this is a photo of the pawpaw orchard at OSU South Centers in Piketon, Ohio. And so the recommended spacing in an orchard setting is 8 feet by 18 feet. But really the critical thing is to make sure at this stage of the tree's development that you're giving them plenty of water and mulching them to minimize any kind of weed competition. And this is a picture of a more mature pawpaw orchard. In terms of fertilization, you can use a synthetic option like urea, or stick with organic options like chicken compost or fish meal. In terms of pruning, in direct sunlight, pawpaw trees can grow anywhere from 20 to 30 feet tall, but in an orchard setting, most of the growers kind of cut off the central leader at 8 to 10 feet, and so that helps protect the fruit from dropping and being damaged too badly, and it also makes it a little bit easier to harvest. And also, I like to prune any branches at knee length and below, just for mowing and landscaping purposes. And then you can see that some of these trees have been painted white, and that's to help protect against sun scald and southwest injury. And there are some organic options available out in the market, or you can use a 50-50 mix of water and white interior latex paint. Make sure you're not using exterior latex paint. It needs to be interior latex paint. And so this is an example of a fruit cluster that you would see in the May to June time period. And don't be alarmed if you see some of these fruit clusters fall off your tree. It's actually a phenomenon called June drop, and it also happens with apples and pears. And that's just the tree kind of naturally assessing what it can or can't support during peak growing season. And this is what a fruit cluster will look like in the June to July time frame. And there is actually some benefit to thinning the clusters at this point, especially if you're concerned about weight load on certain branches. But also if you thin them down, that forces more energy into the remaining fruits so that they become larger and juicier. And here's the grand prize. This is a ripe pawpaw fruit. And you can tell that it's ripe, again, by giving it a gentle squeeze, and it has that unmistakable aroma that you can pick up on whether you're in the orchard or in the woods. And so the North American Pawpaw Growers Association has a tent right next door, and I hope that you'll consider becoming a member. You would get access to our newsletters and our proprietary library of educational handouts. Over the last couple of years, we've been partnering with Ohio State University for the Ohio Pawpaw Conference in the spring, where we offer grafting workshops, and members would get access to free scion wood. And we're working towards organizing more formal orchard tours. And if you have any questions, we've got a lot of people next door to help you troubleshoot any specific issues that you're having, or to answer any questions that you have. And with that, again, my name is Valerie Libbey. You can find me at libbyfarm.com. All of the information that I presented to you today is available on my website. And please feel free to reach out to me anytime at my email address. So thank you so much for spending time with me. I'm happy to answer any questions or hang on. Yeah.
So I'm growing some trees like in a suburban environment with a lot of squirrels. Do you have any advice on how to keep them from picking off all the fruits?
Yeah, so actually Jason Newman at the Cincinnati Nature Center has a similar problem, and what he does every fall is he puts electric fencing around his pawpaws, and that seems to ward off most of the squirrels. Not all of them, but that's kind of a unique situation because, again, he's got a fence where they can just hop right over, and so he's kind of figured out his own situation based on the dynamics in his backyard, but it seems to work better for him. All right. Well, thank you very much. Well,
I just wanted to bring up something with you while I had you up here. I wanted to say I just really appreciated the history elements that you had in there. There were some interesting ones that I hadn't heard about before, but I didn't see mention of James A. Little. And you touched on how not to dehydrate them.
yeah.
But in his book he talks, and this is from 1905, talks about dehydrating, but it's in the sun. And I was wondering if that's ever been looked into as far as like food sciences. Can it be dried in the sun? Does that break down the compounds to where it would not be linked with sickening?
Yeah, so just to repeat Austin's call out in question, he talks about James A. Little, who I didn't include, but he actually is a really great writer from 1905, and he wrote about pawpaws. And Austin, if you haven't seen it, his poster from James A. Little is available for sale in the tent next door. But no, it's really, I've done a lot of research into this and can't find an answer one way or the other, and I'm too afraid to test it out myself personally.
Yeah.
To add on to what Austin was saying, you know, what you just brought up about the Native Americans trying to dry the fruit, it would sound reasonable that they would use the sun, because that's what they did when they dried out meat on sinew and everything to keep it, you know, where they can keep that meat longer. And that sounds reasonable. Maybe it could be because of the slower process of drying out versus a dehydrator that would do it much quicker.
Sun breaks down compounds too, so who knows? The other thing too, and I don't know if this is something I'm misremembering, but I feel like there was some mention somewhere that I come across of Native Americans mixing it with ash.
Yeah.
Okay, that's all.
Yeah, I just haven't found like really good documentation on that.
Yeah.
Pawpaw have a medicinal value or any testing into that?
Yeah, so NAPGA has a YouTube channel, and if you have a chance to check it out, I am not a medical doctor, but actually Dr. Lauren Kirchner, who has a Pawpaw orchard in Brewster, Ohio, he is a medical doctor, and he has over 300 trees at his orchard, and he does a small talk about some of the misconceptions about pawpaws and the toxicity and some of the potential cancer benefits, because there has been discussion about whether or not pawpaws will help cancer patients, and there's no definitive studies around it. But if you have a chance, I would point you to that video. It's only 15 or 20 minutes long, and it's very eye-opening, and I learned a lot when I listened to them.
What is the toxin that becomes dangerous upon dehydration? I'm sure scientists have identified what it is.
Well, we're not sure why, but it has to be related to the acetogenins. So most people say pawpaws are pest-free, and that's not 100% true, but a lot of it has to do with the natural protection that they get from the acetogenins. So it has to be related to those compounds, and when it's exposed to heat, that's where it becomes a little bit of a mystery to us.
But it doesn't hurt it through baking.
Well, up to a certain temperature. So Jim's call out is that it doesn't hurt it through baking, but I have heard of people who have, gotten ill after baking pawpaw bread, but we don't know, did they cook unripe pawpaws or did they bake it at too high of a temperature? That part, there's a little bit of an unknown element there.
I had a question about the harvesting. Is it probably not true that the ideal time to harvest would be 5 minutes before it's going to drop from the tree? So what systems are available to sort of take advantage of that reality, like preventing the bruising when it hits the ground? Are you aware of any test systems that are economical?
Yeah, and actually Ohio State University is working with 2 different growers to test a couple different systems, and they put like kind of a base netting.
Yeah.
I know Mark Boone up in Michigan, he puts a lot of straw under his trees, and that helps soften the blow when the pawpaws drop. I've been experimenting with some Japanese techniques, because I know in Japan when they're growing mangoes, they put a net around them, more in a greenhouse setting, and then the mango just drops into the bag.
Stays on the branch.
Exactly. And so I'm playing around with that, but if you're in an orchard setting, that would be very labor intensive.
Just to reiterate what she's talking about, I went to Dr. Lauren's orchard last year. And one of the things that I noted that there was PVC piping and LOs and everything that OSU had went out there and placed underneath the trees with netting. And whenever the fruit fell, and incidentally one fruit that I looked at very closely was a NC1, probably about a 12-ounce fruit. It was in the net, it had fell out of the tree. No bruising whatsoever, and the netting was set up roughly around 12 to 18 inches off the ground. They're trying to study on how to catch the fruit from keeping it to touch the ground, because once it touches the ground, it's not supposed to be sold to the public because of bacterials and stuff that's on the ground. Can you go into any detail on what the netting looked like?
It was just like a regular netting. It's almost like a chicken wire or netting that you would keep deer from getting in. You know, some of these people, they put up a fence that's probably 7 to 8 foot high, and it's like a netting that goes across instead of a regular fence.
1 by 1 maybe, or something like
Yeah,
that.
1 by 1, 1 by 2,
Got it.
and it just catches the fruit as it falls out of the tree.
Would you agree that you really need to either plan for major irrigation or select a wet site? I wish I'd have known that when I put it at the top of the ridge. Now I have an irrigation system, but if not for that, I think I'd be doomed with my orchard.
Yeah, you know what, Neil Peterson's heartbreaking story is that I can't remember how many acres he purchased, but he planted thousands of pawpaw trees for his personal breeding program, and it was the year of a huge drought, and he lost his entire planting. And so, yes, it's just a matter of what system works best for you and your situation.
I noticed when I find them in the wild, they're very close to a water system.
All right, thank you very much, everybody.